Why is a complete stranger living in that lakeside house I gave to Natalie? The voice of my grandfather Felix was never loud. However, its deep and steady tone sliced through the sparkling background of Christmas carols and instantly froze the air of the spacious dining room. A dry clink echoed as a silver fork struck a plate. It had slipped from the hand of my father Grant. I tightened my grip on my glass and quietly looked over my family. The color had drained from my father's face, and cold sweat glistened on his forehead. My mother Maya, seated beside him, stared at my grandfather with a pale face. And then there was my sister Jordan. Perhaps she didn't understand the situation, or perhaps she believed it had nothing to do with her, but all she did was frown irritably and stop the hand that had been fiddling with her smartphone. "Dad, what do you mean by that?" My father's voice cracked. "This must be some kind of mistake, right?" "Mistake?" My grandfather slowly set down his wineglass and pierced my father with a sharp gaze. Those eyes were no longer the gentle ones I had adored since childhood. Last week, the moment I returned to this country, I headed straight for the lakeside. I wanted to see that nostalgic house again. But what I found there was not Natalie. It was a strange family having a barbecue as if the place belonged to them. They told me this. "We're renting it from Grant, the landlord." I heard my mother gasp softly. Why was something like this happening? My own reality is nothing more than days spent working from morning until night just to pay the rent on my shabby apartment. Meanwhile, my parents and my sister live quite differently. Even though my father and mother both retired from their jobs several years ago, they always seem to have plenty of money. Our investments are doing well. We still have old assets. Saying that, they drove luxury cars and wrapped themselves in designer brands. My sister Jordan is 2 years younger than I am, yet her life is the complete opposite of mine. Her social media is filled daily with photos of fancy restaurant meals and overseas trips, always with captions like, "Thanks, Mom and Dad, living my best life." Why were our lives so different, despite being sisters? Since childhood, that question has stayed in my heart. "Natalie, you're the eldest, so you must be patient." "You're the big sister, so let your little sister have more." Growing up hearing those words, I eventually came to accept the idea that I am not the child who is loved. When I graduated high school and was practically pushed out of the house to live on my own, I simply thought, I knew it. Because of that, even on my way to today's party, I was filled with a gloomy feeling. But I picked up a letter and forced myself to regain my composure. It was a letter from my grandfather, delivered for the first time in 3 years. With that letter in my bag, I arrived in front of my family home, and cheerful music could be heard leaking from inside the house. Even when I pressed the doorbell, no one came out for quite some time. The one who finally opened the door was my mother. "Oh, Natalie, so you came." The moment she saw me, my mother openly scowled. Her expression was as though she were looking at an uninvited guest. "Grandpa invited me." When I said that, she hesitated for a moment as if she wanted to say something, but she quickly forced a smile. "Yes, it seems he asked your aunt for your apartment address. I wonder why he didn't ask us." "Well, whatever. Just don't say anything unnecessary today. We're also celebrating Jordan after all." "Celebrating?" Jordan passed a modeling audition. "Well, it's just a small registration-based one." My mother said that proudly, giving my cheap coat a disdainful glance. "Couldn't you have worn something better?" "Anyway, come inside." When I entered the living room, a fire burned in the fireplace, and the entire room was filled with expensive decorations. "Hey, Natalie, still alive?" My father spoke with a sarcastic tone while lounging on the sofa with a champagne glass. "Dad, stop it. Poverty might rub off on me." Jordan, wearing a new dress, laughed in a high-pitched voice. A large jeweled ring sparkled on her finger. Normally, this would be the moment when I shrank back and waited silently for time to pass in a corner. That day was different. A figure seated in an armchair at the back of the room slowly stood up. His back was straight, and his neatly combed white hair shone softly. "Natalie." It was my grandfather. He looked at me with a warmth he never showed to my parents or my sister, and he opened his arms. "Grandpa." I ran toward him and threw myself into his chest. That familiar scent. This place was the only spot in this house where I could feel truly safe. "Thank you for coming, Natalie. You've been through a lot." I felt there was a deep meaning behind my grandfather's words. Now, let's eat. We will talk afterward. At his signal, we all took our seats at the dining table. At first, things proceeded as usual. My father boasted proudly about his so-called imaginary business. My mother Maya echoed him, and Jordan demanded things selfishly as always. While quietly spooning soup into my mouth, I kept watching my grandfather. He barely touched his meal and simply observed the family in silence. That silence gradually grew heavier, spreading across the table like a thick fog. And when the main dish, the turkey, was carved, my grandfather finally spoke. The other day, I went to the lakeside house, but Natalie wasn't living there. Why is that? The moment he said that, my world flipped upside down. With a trembling voice, I asked, "Grandpa, what house are you talking about?" He looked at me with sorrow in his eyes and slowly shook his head. "I knew it. They told you nothing." Then he turned his gaze to my parents, staring at them as though looking at filth. "Grant, Maya, explain yourselves. What did you do at the house I gifted Natalie for her 20th birthday 3 years ago?" My father wiped his sweaty forehead, desperately searching for words. "Well, you see, Natalie was still young and we thought it would be difficult for her to manage. So we took care of it instead." My grandfather's voice rumbled low. "Took care of it by renting it out to strangers and pocketing the rent? Including the monthly allowance I sent to Natalie as well?" "You're misunderstanding. We did it all for Natalie." My mother shrieked. "If we gave that girl money, she'd just waste it. That's why we were managing it for her." Managing? My grandfather slammed his fist onto the table with a sharp thud. "Managing means reporting to the owner and giving them the profits. What you were doing was not management. It was an embezzlement." His words echoed heavily throughout the room. "Yes, but this was all for Natalie." Hearing my mother's frantic excuses, I couldn't hold back the dry laugh rising inside me. "Ha ha, ha." My sudden hysterical laughter froze the entire dining room. My mother stared at me with a twisted expression. "What's so funny, Natalie?" I fixed my cold eyes on her and slowly opened my mouth. "For Natalie's sake? How can you tell such a blatant lie? Grandpa, show them." At my signal, my grandfather picked up the tablet placed beside the table and slid the screen toward my parents. "Press the play button, Grant." My father touched the screen with trembling fingers. The date was 3 years ago, right after I had been pushed out of this house and forced to live on my own. In the video, my parents were smiling broadly, and Jordan, who still looked very young, stood beside them. "This is such a nice house. Are you sure we can really use it?" My mother's excited voice rang out in the recording. "Yeah, Dad's not coming back, and we'll just keep it from Natalie. That place is too good for her." My father said this as he accepted an envelope full of cash from a man who looked like a real estate agent. "Daddy, with this money, I want to study abroad." When Jordan begged, my father patted her head and said, "Of course. As long as we have the rent from this house, any dream of yours can come true." The video switched. The next footage was from several months later. A completely unfamiliar family was being recorded as they entered the house. As the video played, I stood up and slowly walked toward my parents from behind. "I saw this video for the first time just 3 days ago." "What?" My father tore his eyes away from the screen and stared up at me in shock. "3 days ago? What do you mean? You came back to the country today." "You were fooled, Dad," I whispered into his ear. "Grandpa returned 3 days ago, and the person who picked him up at the airport was none other than me." "What?" The faces of my parents and Jordan all changed color at once. When I met Grandpa for the first time in years, he cried when he saw how worn out I was. That's when we realized we had misunderstood each other all this time. So we went straight to the bank and checked every transaction. Then we went to the lakeside house together and saw with our own eyes a strange family having a barbecue there. I placed both hands on the table and glared at my parents. In other words, before I even came to today's party, I already knew everything. That you forged my signature, rented out the house in my name without permission, and used the money to fund your own luxuries. "Natalie, you knew?" And stayed silent. My father's voice trembled. "Yes, I made a bet." I didn't even try to hide the contempt in my eyes. Maybe, just maybe, there was still some trace of humanity left in you. Maybe, when Grandpa confronted you, you would be honest and apologize. I gave you that last chance because I wanted to believe that. I deliberately shook my head in disappointment. But the result is exactly what I expected. We were managing it. It was for Natalie. Nothing but excuses and lies to protect yourselves. I'm beyond disgusted. No, Natalie, this is... I exchanged glances with my grandfather. He nodded deeply and gave me a small signal. From then on, it was my turn to end it. Grandpa, that's enough. I'm tired of dealing with people like them. I took an envelope from my bag and slammed it onto the table. Then I showed them a single document. My familiar name was written on it, but the handwriting was clearly not mine. This is a property management authorization form. It seems my signature was forged. You used this to impersonate me and sign a rental contract. The tenants have been paying $2,000 a month for the last 3 years, haven't they? $2,000 a month. About what I earned through exhausting work. For 3 years, I didn't need to calculate it. A massive amount of money had moved behind my back and vanished. That's not all. My grandfather presented a stack of letters, clearly opened at some point. Every month, I sent Natalie $1,000 in support. And I also wrote letters. How are you? Are you having any trouble? How is the house? But I never received a single reply. When I called you because something felt wrong, you always said the same thing. Natalie seems busy. She's going through a rebellious phase and won't talk. I picked up the bundle of letters. The dates ranged from 3 years ago to last month. The recipient was undeniably me, to my beloved Natalie. Even knowing the truth, the moment I read that line, tears streamed down my face. All this time, I had believed my grandfather had abandoned me. I thought he had moved abroad, lived happily, and simply forgotten about me. But I was wrong. My grandfather had been thinking of me all along. The ones who had shut him out and pushed me into a darkness of loneliness were my own parents sitting before me. My grandfather and I shared many hobbies, including antique collecting, and we had spent countless hours together when I was a child. We talked about the beauty of old stamps and imagined the lives of nameless people who once held them. But 3 years ago, my grandfather moved to Europe to start a business with an old acquaintance. At the airport, right before we said goodbye, he held me tightly and said, "Natalie, live strongly. I've prepared a place where you can live freely, and never let anyone else decide your worth." That was the last conversation I ever had with my grandfather. After that, all contact from him ceased. My parents told me, "Your grandpa is busy with his life over there. He said he won't be able to contact us for a while." And I was made to believe it. But then I understood. Grandpa would never have abandoned me. And the place he had prepared for me, a place where I could live freely, was that lakeside house. My thoughts snapped back to reality. In front of me were my parents, unable to hide their panic and irritation. You turned my memories with Grandpa, my future, everything into money and used it for yourselves, didn't you? No, that's not true, Natalie. My father leaned across the table, reaching out to grab the tablet and documents. This is a misunderstanding. We were just borrowing it temporarily, and we were going to return it later. Yes, that's right. We saved it. We saved money for you. Lies! My grandfather slapped my father's hand away. I had a private investigator look into everything. The account receiving the rent payments was your personal account, Grant. All the transaction records have been examined. The balance is 0. I also know you've been juggling credit card payments to keep up. Ugh. Hit directly where it hurt, my father collapsed to his knees. Why? A strangled voice escaped my throat. How could you do something like this? You knew exactly how I was struggling every single day, didn't you? While I was barely surviving those miserable days, they were using the rent from my house to buy new cars, expensive clothes, and to indulge Jordan in luxury. Natalie, you're wrong, my mother shrieked. We were only making good use of it. It was too early for you. You couldn't possibly manage a property, could you? That's why we did it for you. And with the income, yes, we raised the standard of living for the whole family. You're part of this family too, aren't you? If we're happy, then you should be happy as well. The logic was so selfish that I was at a loss for words. Family? The moment I muttered that, my grandfather roared, "Silence!" The air vibrated with his fury, and my mother shrank back with a gasp. How dare you spout such nonsense? What you did was not for the family. It was exploitation. You're no different from parasites fattening yourselves by feeding on your own daughter. My grandfather's rage had reached its peak. I told you we examined all the account records. Every dollar withdrawn went to Jordan's tuition, overseas trips, and your wasteful spending. There wasn't a single cent used for Natalie. My father, drenched in sweat, clung to the table, shaking violently. But legally, as her guardians, we had management rights. Natalie is an adult. My grandfather cut him down instantly. And forging her signature is a serious crime. Forgery of private documents, embezzlement, fraud. The crimes you two have committed are far more than just one or two. Fraud? Jordan let out a foolish-sounding voice. It seemed she was finally realizing that this situation was far more serious than her new dress or her vacation plans. Dad, what does that mean? Are you saying our trips and these clothes were all paid with Natalie's money? No way. That can't be true. This plain, pathetic Natalie? There's no way this woman had money worth taking. Her words stabbed cruelly into my chest. To her, I was such a worthless existence that even exploiting me felt absurd. And my parents had kept me in that pathetic state on purpose, feeding on my assets while basking in their twisted sense of superiority. I can't believe this. I stood up and looked down at my parents. The once overwhelming figures who used to control and frighten me now looked like nothing more than petty criminals. Dad, Mom, you are not my parents anymore. You're just thieves. Natalie, how dare you speak to your parents like... My father tried to yell instinctively, but my grandfather's cold gaze froze him, and he swallowed his words. My grandfather spoke quietly. Grant, Maya, your excuses end here. Another full set of this evidence has already been submitted. Submitted? The expression drained completely from my father's face. I consulted my attorney. It has been sent to the police. The police? You're joking. My mother screamed and shot up from her chair as if thrown. How could you report your own family to the police? Are you insane? At that moment, Jordan suddenly burst into a shrill cry. No, I don't want the police. I won't be able to become a model. It's all Dad and Mom's fault. I didn't know anything. I was just a kid, so it's not my fault, right? Jordan. My mother looked at her daughter as if seeing a monster she had never met before. Her beloved, spoiled child had betrayed her at the final moment. How could you say that to your mother? Because it's true. You told me not to worry. I didn't know it was Natalie's money. It was a hideous sight. This was the true identity of the family I had always wished for. What existed here was nothing but self-preservation and ego. I slowly stood up and looked down at them with icy eyes. That's enough. My voice was calm, so calm it surprised even me. I don't want to hear any more excuses or blame shifting. Grandpa, that's enough. My grandfather nodded deeply and spoke, sad yet resolute. Yes, I agree. There is no need to let the air of this house be tainted any further. And then it happened. The doorbell rang solemnly. Ding dong, ding dong. They're here. My father collapsed to the floor. My mother clutched her head and began to tremble. Jordan gripped her phone tightly and backed herself into a corner, but there was nowhere left for her to run. My grandfather looked at me and spoke gently. Natalie, go and open the door. I nodded and walked toward the entrance with heavy steps, yet with firm determination. When my hand touched the doorknob, I paused to take a deep breath. Once I opened this door, there would be no turning back. It would be the moment when the chains of family finally broke and I began walking my own life in the truest sense. Standing in the entrance hall were 2 police officers and my grandfather's attorney, Adam. Adam surveyed the room with a stern expression before approaching my grandfather. Felix, my apologies for being late. The procedures took a bit of time, but it looks like we made it. Thank you, Adam. At my grandfather's words, the police officers stepped into the room. Under their intimidating presence, my mother Maya let out a short shriek and tried to hide behind my father Grant, but he himself had collapsed to the floor, unable to support her or himself. Grant Logan and Maya Logan, correct? One of the officers announced in a formal, imposing tone. We request that you come with us to the station. Come with you? This must be some kind of mistake. My father, clinging to the last scrap of pride, forced a twisted smile and tried to stand. Look, this is nothing more than a family dispute. My father is just a bit emotional. Silence. Adam cut off my father with a sharp voice. He pulled out several documents from his leather briefcase and thrust them before my father's eyes. These documents contain evidence of all the crimes you have committed: embezzlement, fraud, forgery of private documents, and above all, the unlawful exploitation of your daughter's property. The victim's report has already been filed. That's exaggerated. It is not exaggerated, Adam declared, his tone cold as ice. The complaint has already been submitted with Miss Natalie's signature. A complaint? My father looked at me with eyes full of disbelief. Natalie, you can't be serious. You're really going to betray your own parents? Sell them? What an awful way to phrase it. I let out a cold laugh. I simply followed the proper procedures to take back what was stolen from me. Yes, this wasn't something I did because my grandfather told me to. 3 days ago, when I learned the whole truth, I collapsed in tears in front of him. But once I finished crying, I asked him myself to summon an attorney. I told him, I want to settle this with my own hands. My grandfather simply respected my resolve and prepared today's stage for me. That's a lie! A lie! Suddenly, my mother began screaming like a madwoman. I'm not the bad one. Grant was the one who wanted to do all of this. I was against it. He's the one who said, who cares about Natalie as long as we're having fun? What? Don't you dare lie, Maya. My father shouted back, stunned by her betrayal. You were the one who said you wanted a new fur coat? You were the one excited about sending Jordan abroad. And you're the one who forged the signature on the authorization form. You told me to write it. Right in front of the police officers, an ugly blame game erupted. I watched the scene as though it were something happening in a distant world. The absolute parents who once intimidated and controlled me. Their dignity was nowhere to be found, replaced only by pitiful selfishness and panic. Stop. Just stop already. Jordan covered her ears and screamed, Dad, Mom, you're the worst. What about me? I'm not involved, right? I'm not getting arrested, right? She looked desperately at the attorney. Attorney Adam looked down at Jordan with a pitying gaze. Young lady, you may not have been a direct perpetrator, but if you enjoyed luxuries paid for with stolen money while knowing the circumstances and staying silent, you bear moral responsibility. And your ring, your bag? All of those will likely be seized as evidence. No, I won't give them up. Jordan clutched her bag and backed away, but one of the officers approached calmly and extended a gentle hand. Come along, please. Prompted by the officers, my father and mother were handcuffed. The cold metallic clink echoed through the room. Natalie, help me. Just before being taken away, my mother screamed toward me. I was wrong. I'll apologize. We're family, aren't we? Withdraw the complaint, please. Natalie, I'm begging you. Forgive us. I don't want to go to prison. My father pleaded desperately. I looked straight at them. There was no fear, no hesitation left inside me. Goodbye. Never appear in front of me again. That was all I said. Their screams faded into the distance. The red lights of the police car flashed violently outside the window, and then silence returned. With my parents being taken away and Jordan crying behind them, I turned toward my grandfather. He nodded in satisfaction and gave me a thumbs up. I took a deep breath, stood firmly on my own feet, and looked toward the future. I would never let anyone interfere with my life again. This was the first victory I had earned by my own will. The following months were truly a whirlwind. My father and mother received prison sentences and were taken into custody. Jordan was spared prosecution due to her low level of direct involvement, but the cost was enormous. All of my parents' assets were seized, and all the brand name items, jewelry, and luxury cars she had flaunted were confiscated. She lost her home, her money, and above all, the friends who used to spoil her vanished instantly once she became the daughter of criminals. Meanwhile, I was living the most fulfilling days of my life. Under my grandfather's guidance, I studied management and asset administration relentlessly, and within a few months, I became capable of supporting him as his right-hand assistant. No longer dependent on anyone, standing on my own feet. That confidence freed me completely from the shackles of my past. One rainy night, I received a call on my new cell phone from an unknown number. When I answered, it was Jordan calling from a public phone. Natalie, I don't have anywhere to stay. None of my friends will help me. Please help me. I didn't know anything, okay? I'm basically a victim too. The same spoiled, dependent voice as always. I spoke quietly. Go work. Live on your own strength, just like I did. Then I hung up the phone abruptly. There was a pain in my chest, but more than that, I felt a refreshing sense of relief. With this, I had truly severed the ties with my past. Several years have passed since then. The lakeside house has become a precious home where my grandfather and I lived together. The chains that once bound me no longer exist. I do not know how my parents or Jordan are doing now, nor do I have any desire to find out. They walked the path they chose, and I walked the one I chose. That is all there is to it.